Good evening, and welcome to Hidden History, URBAN-15's monthly e-magazine for arts and culture in San Antonio. For the third month, we are producing this show from our homes because we have chosen to stay safe just a bit longer. Tonight, we are celebrating Pride Month with a gathering of very special friends who will give us their reflections on the historical record of San Antonio's LGBTQ community. Following interviews and two amazing performances, one by Los MENtirosos and the other, the last public performance by playwright Sterling Houston. Following those items, we will be treating ourselves to a full screening of the 51-minute documentary by Noi Mahoney, Hap Veltman's San Antonio Country. This is a great revisiting of the best place to dance in San Antonio, a place that shocked the local leadership when it opened in the early 70s. And this is a great adventure. It's a period piece. You're going to enjoy it. So let's celebrate Pride Month with tonight's Hidden Histories. Thank you for logging on, and we'll see you next month.
I am an assistant archivist, or the assistant archivist at UTSA Special Collections. I fell into this job in a rather wonderful way. When I was in graduate school, I was doing research on our local LGBTQ community, and I met a chap named Gene Elder, who happened to be an archivist at the Happy Foundation GLBT Archives. I met with him and volunteered as an intern for my first semester in college and helped to inventory the amazing collection that is at the Happy Foundation. The following semester, a full-time position came open at UTSA Archives, and I interviewed and got the job, and that was the beginning of my career as an archivist. I was getting a degree in history and had planned to teach, but I took a different path, and now I work in the archives. Back in 1993, UTSA had a department called the Center for Research on Women and Gender. And over the years, part of their collecting focus became LGBTQ materials. And in 2006, they had collected a small amount of materials, 7 small collections. And when a new crew came on board a few years later in 2011, it really intensified the focus on proactively collecting LGBTQ materials. And that meant an intensification in outreach to donors, individuals, organizations, and letting folks in the community know that they had a place to donate their materials to. It would be in a controlled environment, get them out of the garage or the attic, wherever those materials had been, which is normally where they're stored, and into a controlled, environmentally controlled environment, and also make them accessible to people. Anyone who wanted to see a collection could come in and see materials. So it really helped for us to preserve local history and get the message out to folks in the LGBTQ community that that's a big part of our mission. We looked at other repositories across the state to see if there were, we didn't want to duplicate efforts of who was collecting. And we found that UTSA really was the only university or repository institution that had LGBTQ collecting as a focus. While some other repositories had maybe one or two small collections, it was not in their collection development policy. So for us, it was a formal attempt to really build our holdings and preserve that facet of our community. The collection that you refer to is actually 23 collections. And they're each very unique in their own ways. The significance of the collections varies. I have my favorites, which I will talk about, but significance is often contingent by who's looking at the collection. What are their objectives, their research objectives? We help patrons find collections that fit with their lines of inquiry, and also suggest additional materials if they haven't identified specific collections that we think will help with their research. I can certainly give you some highlights, collections that I think are of particular significance because they're, for our area, quite rare and quite singular. The first one would be the Linda and Cynthia Phillips papers. Linda and Cynthia Phillips were early transgender activists. They met and married in 1958 when Linda was Jim at that time. And Cynthia knew that Jim had this other side. That was Linda. And so back in the 50s, it was a very unusual thing. And Cynthia was quite young, so she's like, okay, if that is who you are, then that's fine. So they got very involved in the transgender community and developed what was called the Texas Tea Party. It was the largest gathering of cross-dressers in the nation and possibly around the world. They had hundreds of people attend. There are wonderful videos of the gatherings, which is great. We have video and photographs. They formed the Bolton and Park Society, which was responsible for organizing the Texas Tea Party. And they organized and put those on for decades. Linda, unfortunately, passed away in 2016, but Cynthia is still living, and she's a very good friend. And I love listening to her stories about what it was like to be a part of the trans community in a time before that wasn't even discussed, and what it was like to really blaze the trail for other people to openly be transgender. So they truly were pioneers in what is now a very open movement. Last year, in June, we being UTSA Special Collections, were part of the Trans America exhibition at the McNay Art Museum. We had a gallery where we were able to display our many trans materials, including Linda and Cynthia Phillips papers. And the title of our exhibit was Trans San Antonian. But it was really a very special opportunity for us to get our materials out to a very broad audience. They had several thousand people, actually 30,000 people who visited the exhibition. So, and Cynthia attended the opening, so she was able to see her materials in an art museum on display, which was really special. The second really significant collection, one of my personal favorites, is the Gene Elder papers. Gene Elder, as I mentioned, was the archivist at the Happy Foundation. And he donated his personal journals to UTSA Special Collections. There are 23, and you'll be able to see the pictures. They're gigantic. It's just like these tomes. It's this amazing mix of Gene's art, clippings, poems that he wrote. Other people would put their artwork in there. Just pretty much everything that he saved, everything. His school records, his photographs from when he was in the Navy for a short time, pictures of his family. It just starts back in, I think the earliest one is the 1970s and goes all the way up till probably right before he died. He added some things in 2016. So you've got a really broad swath of history in these amazing journals. When I take them into classrooms for students to see, or when we have a class come into special collections, they're really blown away that someone would take the time to put together their life story into journals and then donate them so other people can see what it was like to be gay over decades in San Antonio. It's definitely a special collection. He was a very special person, endlessly creative, pretty eccentric sometimes, but absolutely fun to be around. So it's a favorite for me and with our students and other researchers. The next significant, and I think they're all my favorites. I can't just pick one. I love them all because they're so different. The Lolly Johnson papers are so rich in photographic history. It's a delight to look at them. She was a very successful nightclub owner in San Antonio. I think she had 9 nightclubs between the late 60s up through the late 90s. And the reason she was so successful is she not only had the businesses that were, they were gay and lesbian bars, but she was very committed to that community and was very actively involved, in organizations. And from what I hear, I never met her, but people say she was just an intensely kind human being who really did care truly about that community. When you look at the photographs, you're getting this intimate glimpse into gay, queer bar culture over decades. And you can sense, looking at some of the photographs, just the camaraderie that those spaces engendered and how important bars were for gays, lesbians, trans individuals to have those spaces where they could really be themselves and come together with their community. So her papers are really a snapshot of a piece of San Antonio that a lot of folks don't know about. But then again, there are a lot of people who remember Lolly and her bars and how important they were to their lives. Lolly's first bar was the Zoo Club. And I don't have the dates pulled up in front of me, but it was in the 70s. She had the Zoo Club, then she had the New Zoo, and then the New Zoo 2. So just sort of these different iterations of one bar. She had a bar called the Broadway Cabaret, which was on Broadway, and it was not just a bar. They had floor shows, and you'll see some of the pictures. They're quite remarkable. They had these gold glittery curtains behind the performers. One of the performers, Jimmy James, who is still performing today, he became famous. He became well known as a female impersonator of Marilyn Monroe. Very convincing. He went on I think it was the Phil Donahue show, which was back in the 80s. I seen footage of it, and he became famous after that, being on that show, and very well known as Marilyn Monroe. He looked so much like her. It's quite amazing. But he got his start here in San Antonio at Lolly's Bar. She also had a bar called LJ's, and I know there were a few more. Can't think of them off the top of my head. But in the guide for her collection, they're all listed out, and there are gobs and gobs of photographs from these different places. They're just wonderful. The gay areas in town sort of evolved with, well, not sort of, they evolved in the wake of white flight, with people moving out to the suburbs. You would get these areas just a little bit north of San Antonio where spaces were being vacated, and it was an opportunity for gay and lesbian business owners to open up businesses and bars. And that continued as white flight continued up the central corridor north of San Antonio. That's where gay businesses and bars started opening. And I think that was the case that's on St. Mary's as well. There were some pretty derelict spaces there. And that was often where you would find queer culture, or in these sort of interstitial derelict spaces. It opens up an opportunity for populations that are somewhat marginalized to like lay down roots and make their own space. I came across a newspaper article, or someone in oral history told me about it, but the persistent problem that clubs faced in San Antonio, it came from the military police. And the San Antonio Country, which was Hap Veltman's club, large gay disco during the 70s, the military police were in there every night. And they raided the club. It was right before Christmas, so the club was really busy. And they would show up and start checking IDs. They'd be checking license plates out in the parking lot. And the local police also showed up, and they brought paddy wagons, as Jean called them, hauled a bunch of patrons out of the club and took them off to jail. And the military threatened to put the club on the off-limits list, which, do you know what off-limits lists are? Have you ever heard of them?
Yeah.
They were posted in the barracks, and also businesses that military personnel were not supposed to go into these establishments. And they ended up being the first place that gay and lesbian military personnel would go looking for those, because then they'd know exactly where to go. It's ironic, thanks to the military. They brought a lot of people together.
Thanks for the intel.
Yes. But that was a big problem. Hap went to, had a military hearing, and was able to block the military from putting the country on the off-limits list. And we have a transcript of that in the Gene Elder papers. He donated a transcript. Another photograph collection that we have is from South Texas. Victor Lopez and Rudy Cardona they own Texas Crown Productions. They created and organized the Miss Corpus Christi America pageants and related pageants. And Victor, who works in UTSA at the library in the office that was next door to mine, happened to mention that he had these photographs of drag pageants from the 80s and 90s in his garage. And I said, get those out of there, get them to us, because we would love to have them. And they're just a treasure trove of many, many pageants. He also loaned us video, which we were able to digitize. And there's one pageant in particular, the 1991 pageant, it's just a blast to watch it. The music and the gowns and just the artistry that went into these pageants is really quite phenomenal. That particular collection, as with many of our LGBTQ collections, has been digitized, and it is available through the online guide that we have, but it's also part of the Digital Transgender Archive, which is a massive hub for transgender materials. The Linda and Cynthia Phillips papers are also digitized in part of that. So through the Digital Transgender Archive, which is out of, I hope I get this right, Mount Holyoke University, I think. People from around the globe have sent them their digital materials. And so you can go and find our materials as well as other repositories through that particular platform, which is really phenomenal. We have about 7 boxes of Sterling's materials, and they include all his scripts for his plays with annotations, which is really nice, different drafts of it for a researcher or just someone who would like to look at his materials to see what his thought process was, his creative process. And just reading through his plays and his written work, for me, gave me a sense of his upbringing in San Antonio. He wrote, when he came back to San Antonio, he wrote quite a few plays and some written work about growing up on the East Side and what his family was like. It's very entertaining to have that first-person perspective, his recollections of the characters in his family and what it was like to go to Cameo Land, a Black theater, and see Black films and be a part of that community. And also, when he comes back into that community, he's worked in San Francisco, he's been to New York, he's been to LA. He was in San Francisco, he had a band called the Flesh Tones. And within this collection, the Sterling Houston papers are these fantastic photographs. They're publicity shots for the band. And they're just so well done, black and white, very avant-garde. The collection gives you a very good sense of the person and the artist. He was very fluid in his presentation of himself. And he really pushed boundaries, personally, professionally. Oftentimes I find that through collections like Sterling's, I've gotten to know someone who passed that I never got to meet in person. I think our paths probably crossed in and around San Antonio, but I never got to meet him. And that's sort of the odd thing about being an archivist, is you get to know people who are no longer with us. And certainly Sterling was one of those people whom I feel I've gotten to know really well. Our collections are open to anyone. You don't have to have a PhD. I do not have a PhD. But anyone can come in, community members, students, anyone who wants to see our materials, any of our materials are welcome in the archive. The protocols are pretty simple. You just contact Special Collections via email or on the phone, and we set up an appointment for researchers. The physical archival materials, the manuscript materials, are housed in an offsite facility. So we have to set up an appointment in advance so that we have time to go transport the materials across campus. There's a very simple form on our website that patrons can fill out. to request specific collections, specific boxes, the date that they want to come in. On the online finding aids or the online guides, it directs the patron to which campus the materials are on, either at the 1604 campus, or we do have some materials that are down at the Institute of Texan Cultures. But that is specifically stated on the online guide, so they know which campus they're going to need to access. We try to make collections easy to access. There are no barriers or obstacles to accessing materials. We want folks to use our materials, and we help researchers if they're not quite sure what materials they need. We work with them to identify collections that align with whatever their focus is. And even casual researchers, we have community members coming in who maybe were a family member of someone that we have their collection. We have researchers come in from across the globe. We've had researchers from Japan, Finland, England, Canada, Italy, from all over the place. So it's pretty cool. We meet some interesting people, but access is very open. The materials do have to be accessed specifically in our reading rooms because they are archival materials. They don't circulate. They can't be checked out. They have to be viewed in the reading rooms. The collections really represent this great diversity of the LGBTQ community in San Antonio and South Texas. The collections are very diverse, but one of the things I've found in having studied these collections very much in depth is that there's a lot of interconnectedness. The folks who donated these materials, a lot of them knew each other. And so you find within Sterling's collection, he refers to maybe Jean Elder or another donor that we have. And so you're always finding just these connections that, for me, signify a very close community. While it was diverse, people really came together a lot and had this shared vision of where we could be in the future and what challenges there were. Most of the donors were extremely involved in queer activism and really working hard to ensure that members of this community down the road had things a little bit easier. There were certainly, in the past, there were obstacles to being out and being openly gay. And fortunately, a lot of the folks who donated these collections worked hard to remove those obstacles. And I would say that's really important, especially for a younger generation coming up, is to be able to access collections and see that, yeah, they worked really hard and then they made sure that they kept their history. And here it is for me to look at.
Are the lake, I am the river. You take the cake, that's my mistake. I am the river, I will deliver. You are awake, I am the sleeper. I am the giver, I will deliver. You are the lake, I am the river. Flow on, baby. Flow on, flow. Flowing on. I am the bride of eventide. You wash my fears in the stones of tears. I am the bed, you are the pillar. We are all dead, we like a willer. I shake and I bake, flow like a river, slow motion earthquake. Let it flow to the lake. That's right, baby. Just let it flow to the lake. Let it flow. I keep going on. Let it flow so high. Let it flow so low. Let it flow so nice and slow. Let it flow so fast and slow. Let it flow, let it flow.
My name is Rebel Mariposa, activist, entrepreneur, restaurateur. I got my taste for making social change really from San Antonio, right? Being around the artists in the 80s, I always talk to people about how San Antonio has always been a really radical, ahead of its time city. But it was, a lot of it was underground, maybe perhaps because of so much Catholicism. But I was raised just around a bunch of artists who were naturally at that time had to be activists in order to be able to survive, right? To be able to live the life they wanted to live as an artist or as a queer person, or and so much of their art was also about being, surviving and sticking up for themselves. And so it was just something that my surrounding that my mother put me in the arts, around the Guadalupe Theater, the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, the beginnings of the Blue Star, art complex. I mean, when you were raised in those spaces in the 80s and the 90s, you were destined to be radicalized, I think. As far as my lineage being so strong and politically tied and also based in some entrepreneurism, I remember my grandparents, my mother's parents, having a grocery store in Southwest Military Drive. And, we would go into that grocery store. I would see my grandparents working really hard, being these entrepreneurs, raising a large family. My mother is one of 8 children. Then I would hear stories of how my grandfather also had a trailer park at a time. And he was one of the first trailer parks that integrated and allowed Black, tenants in the trailer park. And that was a big deal back then on the South Side. And so I grew up with these stories of how being an entrepreneur also meant, you could be an activist. And, starting to hear stories of my Uncle Gene and my Aunt Sylvia working, for the Democratic Party. And, going to fundraisers or, sitting around and stamping envelopes and just doing things that I could do just naturally being around, my family. The conversations were very much about local government and what's going on and, how are we rally around our people and making sure we get funding and making sure there's fair education. I mean, those were common conversations around the dinner tables and around holiday, tables and times that we had together. So that evolution of consciousness around Indigenous and indigeneity and Indigenous peoples really came from when my mother Viviana was introduced into my life. She started dating my mother Nancy back when I was about 15 years old, or maybe a little bit younger. I was taking Viviana's mother, Miss Enrique, also known as the Chitzin. She was doing writing courses, and my mother was taking courses from her, and I would sit into these writing courses. And then, you know, Viviana came into our lives, and Viviana is always identified as indigenous and is a danzante and has done many sacred ceremonies, been passed around to, you know, down to her from tribes. And so that was the first kind of introduction into that realm of existence. And then, yes, when I went to UT here in San Antonio, I joined Mecha. And that, of course, helped radicalize a little bit more of, you know, this idea of being Chicano and what does that mean, and Aztlan and Texas, and, you know, understanding that, you know, borders, you know, sometimes we didn't cross them, they crossed us. And that was really those kind of melding together between, you know, seeing Viviana and other, you know, strong, two-spirited women coming together, doing ceremony, and then tied with something like a mecha that was college and was peer-based. Those two integrated in my life really began to open up those realms, like you said. The need for spaces that are safe or safer. I was sent a zine recently, or a few months ago, and I was talking about how there's really no such thing as a safe space, because every space is kind of evolving. So it was this idea that we're trying to create a safer space. So yes, I believe that La Botanica is definitely a safer space. I wish that it was safe all the time, 100% of the time, but you know, that's not the case. Community can be messy, but we do our best to make sure that it is as safe as possible, especially for those who are the most marginalized or the most vulnerable. Because like we mentioned earlier, as far as like believing in and understanding the, you know, indigenous ways of thinking, that's one thing that my mother Viviana instilled in me, that if, as long as the most vulnerable population is safe, then the rest of us will be safe. So that's very much a part of how I run La Botanica, how the staff knows to work, you know, and run the place as well. It's important because who doesn't want to go somewhere and feel comfortable and being themselves and enjoy themselves? And, you know, we are lucky to live in a city that currently has, you know, really good local government who is passing, you know, laws and really, you know, trying to make sure that certain people are safe, you know, trans folks are safe, you know, that we're not going around calling things a Chinese virus and things like that. So it makes it easier, but we live in a state that is not like that. We have, you know, a governor, we have attorney generals that really pass laws that are incriminating, you know, just certain lifestyles or choices. I mean, if you can't get an abortion, you know, how do women feel safe? If we can't do remote voting, how are we really going to feel safe? So there's, and it's important within the state to continue those kind of vibrations out of letting know that even though these oppressive forces are trying to put their foot on us, we are going to push back and not be stepped on. And that's very much an energy that I want also to come out of La Botanica as well, a vibration out into this larger space that we currently call Texas. So I feel that this role of leadership is not something that I stepped into. I feel that it's sometimes that is something that you are, that I've been just, I don't want to say necessarily put into either, but it's not like I raised my hand and said, hey, I'm going to do this, you know, and I can stand up and I'll be the leader. I think that when people are brave, they naturally get put in positions of leadership, because people want to be brave, people want to feel safe. And I get a lot of comments publicly and also quietly when I do say very strong statements, and, you know, people say, thank you for saying that. I wish I could say that. Or, you know, if I didn't fear for my job, like losing my job or retaliation, I would say the same things. I believe what you're doing, you know? And so when you hear things like that, it also, you know, it continues to fuel me to make sure that I don't stay quiet. I think that can be the biggest form of oppression. And if I can say what I can say, and it brings voice to some people who aren't able to say those things, then it's not a choice. It's something that I have to do. I believe that it does feel that way, that some of these progressions that we saw our parents make and our grandparents make, we feel like they're getting taken away when you see that, you know, almost 100 EPA regulations are being rolled back by the current administration. It's hard to feel that, you know, progress is not, it's hard not to feel that progress is being unraveled. Yet this was predicted, right? And the Mayans said in 2012, the end of the world as we know it would begin to happen. And they didn't mean it in a Mel Gibson version. They meant it in a way of like things are slowly going to unravel and that things may get a little worse and a little scary. But that is part of how the universe works. That is how things sometimes have to fall apart, right? So that we can then recreate them. So yes, we've made some progressions within a system, but the system is still extremely flawed. The system still upholds white supremacy at its core. If you read the Constitution and if you read who created and wrote those words, I mean, it wasn't written in this way that was really including us. And so, you know, if some things have to come unraveled, if we try to correct things within a system, but the system really wasn't made for us, then yeah, I mean, things are going to come unraveled if we really want to see a world in which it looks profoundly different for us and isn't just lip service. Wow. Well, you know, being Pride Month, if I was in front of, you know, a group of 14 or 15-year-olds trying to instill some hope and love, I mean, what a hard time to be just yourself, you know, at that age. But also, it's a great time to cultivate being brave enough to be who you really are. And knowing that there are going to be people and family who relate to you and who see you, even if sometimes the closest people aren't those people at the moment. Just, you know, the most important thing is that we continue to evolve and revolve. And as much as we want people to understand us and be kind and gentle to us, we have to do the same with those people who are looking at us. And they may not be saying the things we want them to say or seeing us the way we want them to see us. But that's okay. Hopefully they're just doing the best they can. And all you can do is really be who you are and be as honest as you can in your words and your actions with yourself first, and then with others. And through just radical honesty, we can build a really beautiful world together. My version of utopian and local government, I mean, that's such a big question. I think first it's, you know, what we mentioned earlier is like some things just have to come unraveled, you know, and I think that if one thing that has to really stop in this country is predatory capitalism, right? Where these people are making so much money on people's death, on medication, on, you know, feeding people unhealthy foods and unhealthy products. So I think that that would be the first thing, is first building the utopianism, is to unravel some of the things that are extremely toxic to society and to communities. I think that a great way to do it is to start local. You know, that's what we always say, right? You start with yourself, then you start with your family, you start with your friends, and, you know, local governments. I think that we don't give people enough credit. You know, we want to rule, laws, and, you know, we don't really give humans enough credit. And I would love to see that happen. And I think in my utopia, that would definitely happen. I think that the utopian that I see is where we understand that people evolve and we don't just keep running laws based on 500 years ago, or, you know, because people did it 1,000 years ago, because of some book. In the beginning, with the community, what we've been doing during this pandemic is, you know, and we stayed open for a long time. We are currently closed. We'll reopen in June or sooner. In the beginning, it was just a matter of staying open and still providing vegan options for folks, plant-based options for folks, to be able to still pick up and eat healthy, whole meals. But then we started doing groceries so people could buy dried beans and rice and toilet paper and cleaning products and fresh produce. We do produce boxes as well. So, people are able to order them online and then pick them up from La Botanica. Still providing online entertainment as well, still providing a place for drag shows and, with the drag queens and the drag kings and different DJs to have their Tejana explosion and their house party night. So still, really trying to keep people's spirit, up and hopeful and happy. I think we all already know how we can evolve more. I think it's something that's innate within each of us, and it just takes a matter of kind of taking some deep breaths and slowing down a little bit. But we all know that kindness to ourselves and to others is a key component for us to evolve in a way that will not be harmful, hopefully, to any person or living being. So cultivate kindness, cultivate empathy, really understanding the other person's side, having conversations, continuing to learn, knowing that there's just so much to learn out there, thinking of the 7 generations after us and before us, most importantly, with everything that we do and say, especially within laws and policies, not just thinking of today, but really thinking of how this planet is going to be for the next 7 generations. So I think a recipe that, I'm assuming a lot of people have access to potatoes. I think potatoes are something that, are pretty much in most parts of the world are affordable. And I think that people can do lots of different recipes with potatoes. You can mash potatoes, right? You can bake potatoes. As the weather gets warmer, though, there's potato salads, right? There's pasta potato salads. And I think that just incorporating different ways in which when you have an abundance of one ingredient and not being afraid to experiment and just, looking up, from a recipe book or from the internet of going, how many different ways can I make a potato, right? And enjoying just experimenting. And you don't need fancy ingredients. You can work with what you have. I think a lot of times people get nervous about not following a recipe. And I really want to encourage people to let themselves have fun and to see the kitchen as a laboratory in which you experiment with spices and herbs, ingredients. And, sometimes it's not going to turn out perfect, but you get to try it again next time. And you never know what you will come up with if you don't experiment a little bit. You might be missing out on something that you're absolutely going to love. So that is my recipe for success in the kitchen. So one way that people can continue to support La Botanica is to continue to order food from us or the produce boxes. If you do come into Botanica as we open slowly, we just ask that you do it safely with us, that you respect our rules that we're asking folks to do, if it's wearing a mask or staying, 6 feet apart, making sure that when you do come into the space that you're making sure that, you're keeping us safe, keeping yourself safe. We have a website. You can donate money. You can buy the produce boxes from. You can order food online. So if you could visit us at vivalabotanica.com, and shows you different ways in which you can support us during this time.
Los MENtirosos de esta noche. Sir Gio y Gacho Mars. Packy Puro Sananto Fry.
say, who should I pay? I like to know. See, all the things that I could do, all the things I do for you. While I'm waiting, oh, I'm waiting, so cut me on through. Well, if love is all you wanted, well, love is all I give. Just like you, I've been afraid, and like you, they made me pay. Well, we wait and wait and wait for something to happen. And we wait and wait and wait for something to change. See all the things that I could do, all the things I do for you. Well, I'm waiting, oh, I'm waiting, so cut me on through. Well, if love is all you wanted, well, love is all I give. Just like you, I've been afraid, and like you, they made me pay. Well, if love is all you wanted, well, love is all I give. Just like you, I've been afraid, and like you, they made me pay. Just like you, I've been afraid, and the love they got away.
Los mentirosos de esta noche. Sir Gio y Gacho Mark. Packy Puro San Anto Prime.
Well, hi, my name is Noi Mahoney, and I am a San Antonio-based writer and filmmaker. I became interested in the San Antonio country back in 2015. I was actually in Austin, and I was reading a newspaper story about gay history in Texas. And one of the men in the article said, you know, the best gay nightclub in all of Texas, maybe all of the United States back in the 1970s, was this little place down in San Antonio, Texas called the San Antonio Country. And I thought, wow, that was very interesting. I'd never heard of the San Antonio Country. And so I Googled it and started finding out more. And that's when I discovered who Hap Veltman was and what, you know, an amazing person and how much influence he had on San Antonio as we know it today. So I got very interested in the subject, and I thought, you know, this might make a good documentary. Well, when I started on this project, the very first person I contacted was a man named Gene Elder, who is, I don't know what his exact title was, but he was part of the Happy Foundation, and he was one of the original founders of the San Antonio Country nightclub, and I think he was the first manager of the nightclub. And so I thought, I got to get Gene. If I can't get Gene, there's really it'd be really hard to make a documentary about the country without Gene Elder. But he was, he was really happy to take part in the project. He was a great interview. I think I interviewed him for hours and hours, and he had such great stories. And from that first day of interviewing him, I knew I had a good movie. But when I began working on this movie, it was sort of envisioned as being a short documentary. But as I started talking to more people, people would tell me, well, if you talk to me, you need to talk to this guy, and if you talk to me, you need to talk to this person. So it sort of snowballed into, interviewing. By the end, I think I interviewed 25 people overall for the documentary. So it was way too many people to be a short movie. So I thought, well, I might as well make it into a feature documentary. And one of the things that really helped me was the Happy Foundation, which is the foundation left when Hap Veltman passed away. He endowed this foundation to keep gay history alive in San Antonio. The Happy Foundation gave me access to Hap's personal photo archive. And not many people know this, and I didn't know this at the time, but Hap was a prolific photographer. There's a room in the bottom exchange where the Happy Foundation is located. There's just this entire room full of slides. They're not photos. They're those old slides they're Happy's photos. There must be several thousand of them, and they're all undeveloped. And so I went through there looking at some of these slides, and they're just a treasure trove of old San Antonio, what San Antonio used to look like, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Apparently Hap would just walk around with his camera, and just take pictures of buildings, take pictures of streets, take pictures of, street people on the streets. So it was just a really wonderful thing to look through that photo archive. One of the interesting things when I started working on this project, I also started looking through old newspaper clippings from the 70s, and from the stories that people told me, people I interviewed for the documentary, the amount of prejudice towards gay people was kind of shocking to me. But I'm in my 40s, so I wasn't around during that time in San Antonio, but just the amount of hatred towards gay people or fear of gay people was quite shocking. And it was in a lot of the newspaper articles. You can find, I think I included it in the documentary, some of the more eye-opening headlines from that era in newspapers. So one of the things that I really discovered that surprised me was the amount of prejudice towards gay people in San Antonio back then. For anybody that watches this film, I'd like them to take away that, this was a really great nightclub that really brought together, the gay community, but also just everybody, not just gay people, but, heterosexual, straight people, whatever. It was just a club that was cherished by many people. It was sort of like a safe place, a sanctuary for many people in a time and in a place that was very conservative and still is to some degrees even today. San Antonio is still somewhat conservative, but this was just a place that, people had such great memories of, a little bit of forgotten history about San Antonio that sort of came to light again with this documentary. If there's one other thing I'd like to add, it's just that what a amazing figure and very cool person Hap Veltman was. He was sort of a larger than life figure to a lot of people, but so many people had such great fond memories of him. And he was a very influential person on, modern San Antonio. If you look around modern San Antonio today, his fingerprints are all over, places that are very popular now and things that people like to do now. So I'd like people to, really get to know Hap Veltman and what an amazing person he was.
That was quite an evening of interviews and performances. Historical, emotional, sentimental, political, activism, and fun. Thank you so much, all the people who put this production together. I want to remind you that tonight's episode will be available every Monday night, 7 p.m. at this location, urban15.org/livestream. So get that information out to your friends and they can enjoy the episode as well. Now, we're going to take a quick break here. Go get some popcorn, get yourself something to drink, because in a few minutes, we'll be watching Hap Veltman's San Antonio Country. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the evening. Stay in touch with us. And take a look at the survey that is available on the card, which follows. Good night.
But if you were hip, you went there because it was the best dance club in San Antonio.
Everybody accepted you for who you were.
To me, he was like a gay Hugh Hefner. He just had a ton of style.
The city police were really ugly. And I mean, you know, within 3 minutes, there was probably 30 police cars and 2 paddy wagons. I'm Gene Elder. I'm the archives director for the Happy Foundation, which is the Gay and Lesbian History Archive, Gay BLT. History Archive here in San Antonio. We started in 1988. It was it's named after Arthur Hap Veltman. Hap was his nickname, Happy.
Hap came from a very, solid local family, and everybody knew them, and it's a small town here. So he was able to get some things done just out of perseverance, sheer willpower.
My first recollections of Hap were when he had the Kangaroo Court, which had opened a few months before I opened my nightclub, and he was in his office upstairs, which was also the office of the Paseo del Rio Association, and Hap would walk around in his Navy uniform. He was a naval reserve, and he'd walk around with this uniform on with a great big cigar. It was completely different from the Hap that everybody else got to know. Hap had he had a law degree. I think he's got a degree in architecture. He may. And his business experience just played off all those things that he could do, but he didn't want to practice law. He enjoyed doing what he was doing. He loved building San Antonio.
To me, he was like a gay Hugh Hefner. You know, it was the most au courant environment of, you know, stylish furniture, very kind of sophisticated, masculine bachelor pad with really neat artwork, but very eclectic. And he had a parrot and this giant Great Dane dog, and he just had a ton of style and just a ton of interesting people all around. And it was just like the hub of the whole gay social world at that point.
I first heard about Hap when he had the rabbit habit, and simply because it had a little rumor of being, if you were a gay man and you were looking for nice gay men to go have a relationship with or meet, that would be a place to do it. They were classy guys there. This is what I heard back in those days.
I met Hap because I got a job at the Greenhouse, which is a natural foods restaurant down on the Riverwalk. And I think I was about 15 at the time, you know, and my boyfriend worked there and he got me the job, you know. So, and Hap was my boss. Hap and Bobby Cannon owned the restaurant. And actually became friends with Hap. He was a really great guy, you know, and he used to like to sit and talk to me, you know, after the rush was over and stuff like that. And then a lot. And see, I was a Catholic school girl, you know, and so a lot of the guys would come in. Gene was one of them. You know, Gene used to really shock me back then, you know, and he would try to, you know. It was like, but yeah, I didn't know anything at all about gay people. I'm sure a lot of those priests that I went to school with, you know, were gay, but we didn't know that back then, you know. Hap had the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. He had eyelashes that were like about this long, like a deer's eyes or something. I mean, he was a really, like I said, warm-hearted, super intelligent, but yeah, a really special person.
I met him at a party. I'm sure we were doing something crazy. From friend Jay Rosenstein, I think that's where I first met him. And he was just, you know, vibrant and full of energy and hilarious and fun and just, you know, one of these people that had this magnetic personality that you couldn't help but be drawn to. He opened the Kangaroo Court with Bob Buchanan. That was like the, you know, premier restaurant on the Riverwalk, and I'm sure everyone thought he was nuts. Who would want to go down there in that, you know, Riverwalk, which wasn't like it is now?
Come to meet Hap.
His mother roomed with my mother in college. He was the same age as my older brother. Families both went to St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Both families vacationed down at Rockport Coast in the month of August. And growing up, Hap really had nothing to do with someone as young as I was. And it wasn't until after I had graduated from college and Uncle Sam had gotten finished with me when I came back to San Antonio. I remember my mother sending me a newspaper article my senior year, which would have been 63, 64, concerning a proposed development on the Riverwalk. And I had gone to a place in Chapel Hill instead of going to my classes at Duke with regularity. And I thought, oh, well, that would be fun to have something like that. And I called Hap and to see if, and made an appointment. And we spoke, and for about 30 minutes, Hap said, that is just an idea that won't work. And I felt very deflated. I said, what am I going to do? I'll have to get a job now. And he said, the reason why I'm saying this is I have these preliminary plans and no capital. You have a little capital, no plans. and the next day we had a partnership. Kangaroo Court, it was an English-style oyster bar, restaurant, and pub, and we had the umbrellas were the Australian flag.
My point was, still is, Casa Rio was on the river before it happened, but the river ran behind Casa Rio. The hotels, the bars, Juana Dick, all the big nightclubs, the river ran behind their places of business. You came in on the street level and you walked in the restaurant and you just may look out the back window and there was the river back there, but there wasn't any tables and chairs out there. Nobody utilized the river at all. And the Kangaroo Court was the first restaurant that actually opened up that faced the river.
Was he out at the time?
Well, he was out. He wasn't publicly out, but he was not being closeted. He was all of his friends knew, and he had a boyfriend. He had several boyfriends through the years. So, I mean, it wasn't. Which is probably why I was attracted to it. There was a freedom there of being who he was that is always appealing to any group of people. And people, you know, the person who's showing the ability to think outside the box is, you know, intriguing.
While we were building Royal Street Crossing, we'd spend a lot of time driving around, and he'd tell me stories. Tell me about the stories about the first time he really realized he was gay. I remember going to dances. I think this one happened to be at the country club. And he wound up in the bushes kissing some guy, and he thought, oh my God. Then he realized he really liked it. And that's when he realized, I guess that's what I am, because he dated girls too. But that's when he decided that's, you know, I found out who I am. And it was kind of, he told me it was very freeing. It was scary, but a very freeing thing for him too. Interesting, from a perspective that I've never had. I'm straight, so I've never had that kind of a perspective and had to think like that. But he was able to explain it to me in you know, in words I understood perfectly what he was trying to talk about.
How was it to be gay in San Antonio in the 70s?
You were only gay among your gay friends or your gay accepting friends. Nobody walked down the street holding hands. Nobody was hanging on each other. You know, we were not San Francisco. We still aren't. Things have gotten better. But there is a, you know, this great, great fear of the unknown. I wanted to do a program years ago where it was, you know, adopt a gay person and invite them to dinner. You know, they're not going to kill you. They may suggest a few decorating ideas, but, you know, people don't know and they fear what they don't know, which is really stupid, you know?
I'm married now, but at that time, of course, by myself, and I would come down from Dallas and it seemed pretty provincial to me, but I mean, because up there we had the old plantation and we had some really, I remember the first time I saw that bar, I just thought, God, this is just the most amazing place. And the bars in Houston were amazing, you know, because there were areas of town down there. Then we didn't really have that in San Antonio.
In the 70s, there was a lot of unacceptance of the gay community and live and let live, which I've kind of a live and let live kind of a person. So I had some adjustments when I did move to San Antonio, finding a clique that it was accepting of me and my out of the ordinary ideas.
I had been living in New York and came back to San Antonio when I finished my military obligation, and it was a real culture shock because New York had gone through Stonewall and a whole bunch of awakening of the whole gay liberation. And then I moved back to San Antonio, and it was kind of like a time warp. Like I went back in time, not one decade, but maybe two. San Antonio, of course, was very different because I had not been out when I was gay. So it was discovering a whole new gay San Antonio in the early 70s. But still, very, very different from the rest of what the country was going through. You would be in a bar, particularly one that I remember called the Arena, and suddenly the jukebox would be turned off, and San Antonio police and military police would come in, checking IDs for military people and things like that.
That was my experience back in the 70s. That San Antonio had a thriving gay community, but it was a gay community that did not want to be seen by the light of day. There were no parades, there were no events that were televised, or of course they wouldn't have been televised, but everything was very hush and low key. And I think, again, that's because you've got a Hispanic community, a Catholic community, and a heavy military presence. And all three are conservative, closeted communities. But it didn't stop the bars from making money, and it didn't stop the partying. But it did set San Antonio back in things like civil rights marches and parades and getting people to, especially when AIDS came along, getting people active and involved.
Right now it's the 7th largest city in the United States, but it's something like the 32nd media market. So there's 25 smaller towns with bigger media than us, just because the demographics of this place have always been very strange, you know, with the military and the Hispanics. But yeah, it's ancient ground. I love it here myself. And so if you were interested in, you know, new music or art or whatever, you gravitated towards the scene. And so that's kind of how I would always see him around at the art shows and music events and stuff, King William Fair. So yeah, and everybody that was interested in that stuff stuck together.
You know, the gay bars in San Antonio were all sort of around San Antonio College.
Has anybody brought up the El Jardin? The El Jardin, that was a bar on St. Mary Street that I think it went back to the 1960s. It was maybe the first or the oldest gay bar, and right around the corner from that was the Crew, and the Crew went back to the early 70s. So before the Bonham, before the San Antonio Country, there were other bars that had been around for a long time, but they were sort of the old-fashioned queer bars. They were the dark holes with no windows, and you almost had to have a secret knock to get into them.
I think I'm right that there was a gay bathhouse in the basement of the Gunter Hotel.
Yes, I went there.
And then, you know, in the early 70s, a lot of people from San Antonio would go to Austin or Dallas or Houston, particularly Austin, because Austin had good bars and all of that, and they knew they wouldn't run into somebody that they knew from work or whatever. Of course, the joke is if you ran into somebody from work, they were probably gay too, so it didn't matter.
So it's like there was this underground world that you only the initiate knew about.
Starting the San Antonio Country, which I did, you know, Happy is kind of who brought me out as a gay person. I hadn't studied gay history either. I mean, you know, they didn't teach that. And, I mean, I knew nothing about Stonewall or anything. We just jumped into it cold turkey. I mean, Happy sort of knew what he was getting into. The San Antonio Country was fabulous. It was fabulous. It was originally a house, and it was made out of river rocks. I mean, the outside of it was, and inside it had one large room with 3 domes in it, and a big fireplace on this side, and a rose window on the other side. And the one big room in front of the fireplace, it was, you know, a lot of conversation. People moved the chairs around. It was very, very neat the way, you know, people sat and talked and moved, and then the pool table was down there, and then in the little front room, which was a sort of I wanted to be sort of like the elder gentleman's place. They would come. I had Glenn Miller music playing up there, and of course the paintings were around on the walls with little spotlights. So it was very nice. And then from the pool room, it went back into another. This is still part of the original house. It must have been the little kitchenette or something. But anyway, it had a neon light on the ceiling that we stayed there, and we put mirrors all around it in this bunkette. And so that's where all the drag queens hung out. You know, they held court in this room. You had to go through the drag queen room to get you know, from one to the other. And then the back room was a dance floor. And of course we played, you know, only the most hip dance music. There were a certain amount of guys that, you know, didn't dance. They were kind of leather guys, and they came and played pool, and you had your fraternity guys, you know. It was very, you know, what was nice about it is that since there were not any other bars, everybody had to come, so it hadn't factioned off into everybody having their own bar. You know, you had to put up with each other, and the lesbians were there. They particularly kind of liked coming there, I think, once they found their girlfriend, because then if they go to the lesbian bars, everybody's, you know, still hitting on them, so they come to the gay bars so they can be left alone.
I saw Hap at the other gay bar, and he said, "We're opening next weekend." So I was there the first night, and it just totally took off from day one. It was a very wide spectrum of people. You know, it was a gay bar, but there were plenty of straight people that were there, that coming with friends, and there were hippies, there were construction workers, there were Hispanics, there were just anybody and everybody. It was sort of the place to be.
And then that was the beginning of the San Antonio Country, and it was really an unbelievable experience. And so once I was involved with having to do with like decorating or whatever you want to call it, you know, putting the art up, I thought, I want to work here. So I did, and I worked there for maybe 6 years, I guess.
The Country was kind of a place where, maybe because it was a gay bar or whatever, but there were a lot of people just went there to have a good time. And it really was a good time, you know.
Well, it was not long before every homosexual male in Texas knew that the San Antonio Country had opened in San Antonio. And I mean, you know how crowded Fiesta is around here. Well, I mean, Lubbock, El Paso, Dallas, Houston, Waco. I mean, there were just so many gay men in San Antonio. It was just mind-boggling. I mean, it was overwhelming. There was not enough hands to serve the beer, you know.
The first time I ever went to the Country, I was thinking about this the other day. You know, if you were marginally hip, well, definitely if you were gay, but if you were hip, you went there because it was the best dance club in San Antonio. It had all the latest music. You know, the disco rage was happening, you know, at the same time at the Country. And it was the only place in town where you could dance to really good disco. So, of course, all the gay guys were there. And then the really hip girls, straight girls would come. And the lesbians were there too. But the really hip straight girls would come because they wanted to dance. So they'd come with their gay friends, gay boyfriends. And then the really hip straight guys would be on the trail of the straight girls.
Me and a lot of my friends, straight friends, went to the Country because it was just a great atmosphere to dance, you know. They didn't check penises at the door or anything. You just go in and dance, you know.
So it was summer, I think, of 1975 that I discovered the San Antonio Country. And my older sister introduced me to the club because she had a gay friend, her best friend in high school, George. And so she heard about it and told me about it and took me there. And it was a wonderful place.
It was like a liberal wonderland. Everybody was dancing. People would dance by themselves at times. You didn't even have to have a partner of the same sex. You just danced with one guy would come, and he would dance with big giant fans by himself, flipping the fans around and didn't need a partner, and it was so much fun because you could just think how you wanted to think, and you were accepted with who you were.
This is how I told my parents that I was a homosexual. And because I wasn't speaking to them, I was mad at them for, something, I was a spoiled little Trinity student. I got mad at them about something. When speaking to them, and so all they knew was that I was running a nightclub, which they assumed was some sort of heterosexual nightclub. They brought the Newmans down. And they came to the club on a Saturday night. And by the time they left, my father had figured out, he'd even asked me, he said, "There are an awful lot of men in here." I said, "Yeah, Well, my mother cried for a year. I mean, she did not take this well. My father was in the furniture business, and he'd been around a lot of talented gay, I think, decorators and stuff. He was kind of he handled it better. He basically just didn't have anything to say, other than I think he told my mother that, I was still his son, and, but my mother didn't take it well. And the reason that she didn't take it well is because her generation had taught that when this kind of thing happens to your child, it's the mother's fault,
And of course, I guess people are looking for romance, so that you just felt like, well, this is the place to look.
I didn't get to San Antonio until '77, and this was just after Stonewall, and as Larry Kramer famously said, our entire political agenda was sexual promiscuity, and it was, and so that's what I did. I remember there was one 7-week period in the summer of 1975 where every night, that's 49 consecutive nights, I went out and went home with a different guy. And today people think that's a bad thing. So moving to San Antonio, I knew that it was going to be a radical difference. And in fact, it was. The bars were sleepy. The first time I went into the country, I looked at this brown shag carpet, and I was like, well, but where do you throw up? It just didn't make any sense to me. It looked like some extended family's big living room. And it was very friendly, and they did this dance. I had no idea what it was. And I said, is this a Virginia reel? And they said, no, it's called the Cotton Eye Joe. I'd never seen that before. And it was much more amiable. It was much friendlier, but it was much less sexy, much less geared toward hooking up. Our best night was the night we met, because
how did you meet? Tell that whole story, please.
Well, I was just going down there because it was the biggest bar in town. It wasn't my favorite place, but I don't really know that I had one. And so I was there, and there were some people there that I knew at the front bar, which was the quieter. You could have a conversation. But in walking through the bar, I noticed there was this one. The transition between the front bar and the dance bar in the middle was this kind of long wall.
Brick wall.
And there was this guy there standing like Joe Buck in Midnight Cowboy with one leg up and his cowboy hat and his thumbs and his jeans, and looking very stern. And Ron introduced you as his Mexican cousin, as he always did. And
the lady.
And Tom doesn't remember our meeting.
I'm not sure I trust all of his memory, because I did not wear a cowboy hat. I do not wear cowboy hats. No one wears a hat anymore.
What do you mean anymore? It was 1977.
I didn't wear cowboy hats.
Okay.
Except when I was riding horses.
Maybe you didn't have. Maybe that was my wishful thinking. So the country is very important to us. It's where we met.
There was a funny story. Back in those days, men used handkerchiefs, color-coded handkerchiefs, to sort of convey what their sexual preference is. And you wore it in one pocket if you were dominant, and the other pocket if you were passive, and they were different colors for different things. And I did not know about the color coding. I just knew all these gay men are wearing handkerchiefs in their back pocket, and that's real hip. So I got a handkerchief and I put it in my back pocket. And I was in the bathroom, standing at the urinals, when a man asked me, "May I pee on you?" And I said, "Absolutely no, you may not pee on me." And the guy on the other side of me said, "Well, what are you wearing that handkerchief for then?" Because obviously I was disgusted by the proposition. And that's when they pointed out to me that yellow meant that you were into water sports.
Wow.
And that's when it hit me. Oh, you not only have to know what color your handkerchief is, you have to know which pocket you got.
The drag shows, like what was
Oh, they were great. Bring in they had kind of a cadre of like hometown talent that would, and that were, some of those guys were so hilarious. I mean, they would, like, there was this one that was always doing these Bette Midler routines and stuff like that, and I remember this at the country because it's one of the first nights I was working there, and guys would always give you notes to take back to the drag queens, like, "Can we meet you?" or something, like that. And I remember one time, because I was just hanging around outside the dressing room door, and one of them said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I have a note for, like, Diana Ross or whoever," and they were like, "Well, just go in there, honey. We're not going to bite your tits off," and I was like,
But I had already known Gene Elder, who was the manager, from, I used to take classes at Trinity, and he was a Trinity student. And I was doing ceramics, and I had made all these bud vases, and some of them were really short, they're kind of like test ones. They weren't the tall ones. And I remember one night I didn't have any money, so I took this little bud vase with me and sat up at the bar and said, "Would you trade a vase for a beer?" And he said, "Oh, sure." So I gave him the vase, and he gave me a beer.
Because I always thought it was kind of an interesting mystical experience to run a gay club, for a year. I always thought, I should have a degree in psychology after this, because I have heard it all.
One funny thing, one night we were dancing at the country, and I was living in King William in a little apartment, and it was 2:00 and it was time to go home, and we were just having the best time and we didn't want to leave. And it was one of those freaky nights where we were in the car, we were heading home, and realized it was so out of it we were, that it was turn your clocks back an hour. So we had an extra hour, and I remember we just did like a wheelie in the street, turned around, headed back to the club, got another hour in. That was great. That was really fun.
And of course, during our first year, the military decided that we were probably a problem, and they wanted to put us off limits. But of course, before they do that, they send the MPs in regularly to check for military.
And then a lot of times, a lot of people had short hair, so they would get questioned too. We tried all kinds of things, getting lawyers and everything to try to keep them from harassing the people, because they could come and ask you, and I think that's an insult, or that's invading your privacy. But we couldn't do anything about it, so we had to live with it. But a lot of times they would come in and they would haul people away, take people out.
The military police came in with explicit instructions that it was off limits to the military. They didn't want military in there. I don't understand that rationale, but if the guy was gay and he wanted to go to a gay bar, what are they saying? They don't want anybody to know he's gay, he wanted to hide it or whatever it was, but they would come in and harass guys that looked like they were military personnel.
In fact, my early memories of the military coming in weren't so much raids as just quietly men with flashlights going and asking men with short hair to see their identification. And I don't know if you were allowed to refuse to show them your identification. They never asked me. I really didn't look like I was in the military. I didn't look like Anything the military wanted.
Military police would come in particular because we were on the banned list, and for military people were not allowed to come in there, so they would come looking for military people, and I was in there when they would come in looking for underage people. Happy would fight. Happy was also a lawyer, so he would take issue with why are we on the banned list, and he would fight that all during the time that he was alive. It was a constant where they would put him on the banned list, and then he would go over there and he would fight to get the military people be able to come into his bar, and then they'd put him on the banned list again, and he'd go back and fight it. It was a constant battle.
So the cops would come in and ask for ID, and the cops would ask for the military ID. If you did not have, like at that time, a draft card or could show that you were not in the military, then the military police would cuff you and take you off to base. Now the funny story about that is one of my close friends was there that night, and he was picked up and taken back to base. He was at Fort Sam. He was written up and he had to go before his superior officer. His superior officer read it, looked at it, and said, "Oh honey, don't worry about it. I'll pull it in 3 days when nobody's looking." And so, you know, we were in the military too, folks. No big deal.
And, you know, in this one particular one, MP was, always beating his nightstick as he walked through the club, to intimidate people. And that was where we first figured out that that's what internalized homophobia looks like. Because we watched all the other MPs, and I would say that there was probably over a period of time, maybe as many as 10 different MPs. There were different ones every time, but this one particularly liked coming every time, or a lot. The other MPs, they kind of walked through and walked out and really didn't, want to get into this or create a problem, or they were not, you could tell that they were not there to, but this one particular one was doing, and we kept thinking, well, what is he getting out of this? And you can, this is kind of where we understood that gay men that want to prove they're not gay become really hostile and anti-gay to prove to the straight guys that they're not gay. And I'll tell you, talk about homophobic, the Express News was it. Express News, it took a while for the Express News to come around. They were a big problem. By December of that year, they had planned to raid the place. They had the city police in on this too, which was amazing. The city police were really ugly. And during a Christmas Saturday night, the most productive, business night, that's when they like to raid. That's when they can disrupt stuff. And this one MP, the one that had kind of notoriously been causing trouble throughout, decided on this incredibly crowded evening where everyone's bumping into everybody, especially through these little passage areas, that he had been pushed by this, very young-looking, slight student from Austin, and proceeded to take him outside and call for backup from the city police. And I mean, within 3 minutes, there was probably 30 police cars and 2 paddy wagons there. And the police requested to use the microphone, which Hap knew at the very beginning there was not going to be any microphone, because see, this is what they had done in the past at gay bars. They turn off the music and use the microphone to disrupt the crowd. And our DJ Jamie Alexander was told by Hap, he said, whatever you do, don't stop the music. And he didn't. And so they weren't able to, you know, so a lot of people didn't even know this was going on. I mean, it's so crowded, and, you know, they're pushing this. Well, you know, so I go outside and try to see what's happening, and this one policeman is like throwing this student up against the car and jamming his billy club into his stomach. And, you know, and I walked up and I said, I don't think that's necessary. And of course, then he raises his club, you know, to me, you know, and here I am, the owner. He didn't want to talk to the owner about anything. It was just, you know, get back in the club and shut up. This is what I was instructed to do. I immediately called Happy, and Happy came down, and we just kind of stood there and witnessed stuff. Now, the interesting thing that happened, of course, everything was being handled by Happy since he knew what to do, and he had Jerry Goldstein and Mari Maverick, two lawyer friends of his, two civil rights lawyers, two of the best civil rights lawyers in town, who were giving him excellent advice on how to handle this. Because, see, the military had been used to getting away with whatever they wanted to. If they wanted to come throw you in jail and harass the enlisted people that are there, well, there wasn't anything you could do. And but we did do something. And so Happy had decided that he was going to pursue challenging this. It's not really a legal case. It's a hearing. So he went before these hearings to confront these accusations that we were a gay bar, which, of course, you know, my beginning radical, you know, understanding of how to solve a problem at that time was, well, fuck yes, we're a gay bar, you know. What Jerry Goldstein said, oh, no, 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 that isn't what you do. Make them prove it. So and we have the transcripts from that, which is, you know, having these MPs that have not ever had to come out and give their... And this was a room full of about, you know, 20 to 30, you know, officers and stuff all around. And I'm sitting there instructed not to say anything. Jerry Goldstein and Hap's there. And you know, they call up the MPs and say, now, how did you know that this was a gay bar? Well, we went in there and there were, you know, men sitting next to men and kissing. And there was, you know, 3 men dressed as women. And you know, those transcripts are very funny. The things that they would say, you know, like the one MP who was like trying to explain to the officers, you know, if they were men dressed as women or you know, vice versa and all this sort of thing. And they said, well, how did you know it was a man? And he said, well, because there was an erection, the proper placement of the penis. That was his way of saying that. And you know, which made me think he was lying, because I know these drag queens don't get erections, you know. It's like, hello. You know, this went on all over the United States. You know, I think we all had our own little stone walls. I mean, I think probably every city did. You know, San Antonio was just a little more unique since we had so much military here. The way it got solved is the person at the military base, and of course I don't know who it was, because this was kind of told to us by a couple of military people that had the inside knowledge, and they told us, they told Hap stuff, that person got shipped off. This, you know, this was a ranking officer of some sort who was creating all the problems, who was insisting on all this monitoring and, you know, and working with the police to create this raid, because they were going to, you know, we can't have a gay bar, you know, and this was a really nice one, you know, we can't have that going on. You know, we had defended ourselves, and of course that didn't stop it from ever happening again, because then, you know, in the 80s, they pulled the same thing on Kay Ford and her lesbian bar, and it was even uglier with them.
Then he started to get hassled because the Valero Energy bought the land across the river, put up its 2 buildings there, to put up the where Valero Energy built with the faces away from away from the river. That's how insane that was. It was designed by a Houston firm, which had no idea what San Antonio was. You don't build something on the river facing away from the river. But they did. But to get rid of this blot on them, this gay club right across the river, they tried to force Happy out.
And then I remember all the turmoil around the idea that they were going to close the bar in order to make it a parking lot for this big company across the street, because the company didn't like looking out the window and seeing the gay people in the bar down below, and we were sort of offended by that. I think there was that the offense was a little bit from Hap Veltman's point of view. I think he did well on the business of that.
Towards the end, we were getting raided all the time. I mean, all the time. I wasn't there for a military. Like, I don't ever remember MPs coming in, but the cops were coming in all the time, you know.
But yeah, they came, the military police, the vice squad, and the ABC. It might have been the LCB back then, Liquor Control Board. All of them hit him with a real short period of time when they were trying to force him out.
Kind of the head of Valero at that time. I think his name was Bill Greehey, who's now, the savior of San Antonio with all the money he's given around. But I think he was the person who decided that there was a gay bar on the other side of the river, and we need to get rid of that because we need that for our parking lot.
The Valero people trying to force him out. It was really disgusting. And back then, those were in the 70s. You couldn't even, or the early 80s, you couldn't say, you're gay bashing because,
I think it, with all the police attention at the very end, it just got less fun because, people are always like, oh my God, the police are here again, and.
So eventually Hap had to pull his ace out of his sleeve and say, wait a minute, I'm going to buy the building. And he was able to get enough cash together to buy the building and then turn around and sell it to the people who wanted to develop for their parking lot for the Valero building, and made enough money in that to buy the Bonham.
And it is funny because the carpet store next door has never changed. Not one iota since then. That's the same carpet store with the same carpets in the window. It hadn't changed one iota. And the funeral home across the street, none of that's changed. Why the mad rush to tear it down and put in the parking lot for the Southwestern Bell? That's progress for you.
I thought the Bonham Exchange was the most beautiful bar I had seen ever at that time in my life. I went up to him and told him that. Matter of fact, I told him how proud I was of it and how much I appreciated him doing it.
I do remember when the Bonham opened, that was a big deal. That was the biggest gay bar in Texas. And that was like, wow, thank you, Hap. This is amazing. We have fallen up.
He died in 1988 of AIDS, and it was my idea at the time. Well, he had left in his will to start a foundation after both his partners would die. He wanted a foundation to keep going.
Losing Hap was a really big blow because he was just one of those people that brought everybody together.
The last time I saw Hap, we went over to O.Z. White's house, and Hap was there with his boyfriend of the time, and he looked really bad. I mean, he looked very thin, and
he was frail
and very frail. But he was still talking about some project. I can't remember exactly what. But we have to do this, we have to do that. So,
they're still very upbeat and
yeah.
very congenial. Not at all, depressed or sad or anything. He just was very thin and frail looking.
The last time I saw Hap, though, unfortunately, I didn't know it was going to be the last time. You never know. And I was in Aransas Pass. My parents had a place there, and I was visiting them. And I went over to the island to see Hap. And he wasn't in a good mood that day, so he let me in. I went out on the porch, and we all sat talking, but Hap went in. And so everyone just kind of let Hap go in and have his bad mood. Had I known that was the last time I'd see him, I would have made more of an attempt to get him to come out and visit with us that day, but he wasn't feeling good.
Yeah, I went up and visited him in the hospital a couple of days before he died. Jim Stidel and I went up. And he was still saying, I'll beat this. Didn't look like he was going to beat it. And because one day he was parked in his truck outside on Presa Street, and he passed out. He said, oh, he was from hunger or something, but that was when we knew it was really bad. And he went downhill real fast then.
I was living in New York at the height of all the AIDS thing, and people were dropping like flies, I mean, all of us who are alive now that lived through that, we ask ourselves, why are we here, Hap was an amazing person. He really was way ahead of his time. He just really had a vision about San Antonio and about, our lives. I mean, we didn't know what we had in Hap Veltman. He was really something. I miss him, and I wish he were still with us, because the things he did accomplish and the things he could have accomplished had he lived a little bit longer would have been amazing.
I'll just say one thing. His wake was, without question, the most fun party I've almost ever been to. Everybody you would want to see was there, and there was just everyone remembering all the wonderful times that they'd had. It was just a terrific chance for everybody to wish him goodbye. My friend Walter got up on this ladder, and then they released hundreds of balloons, helium-filled balloons, into the air.
One of the thing that I most remember of the country was very influential in the development of San Antonio gay community, sort of precisely because it was like the hip places on the West Coast or New York. It was, it was out in the open in a way. It was downtown on that little section of the river, so it was forward looking. And that was unusual for San Antonio.
It was sort of like our Studio 54 kind of thing. The country really was pretty much, it epitomized the cultural phenomenon of the 1970s.
I think there still is a lot of nostalgia from people that know the country. That was, like I said, that was a good mental time. Psychologically, it's what I think formed us as a gay community in San Antonio.